Welcome to Inside the Mind, a podcast hosted by myself, Jennifer Forster, and my beautiful co-host, Allie May. We're excited to be here, diving into edgy, raw, and relatable conversations, woven together with mind-blowing questions that will shake up your model of the world, expand your thinking, unravel your beliefs, tease apart your patterns, and walk you to the very edges of everything you've ever believed about yourself.
As NLP trainers, coaches, entrepreneurs, we will be traversing the topics of business, relationships, money, family, spirituality, leadership, and personal growth, all through the discerning lens of NLP, ancient teachings, and a healthy sprinkling of womanly wisdom. One thing we believe to be true is that if we want a different outcome, we must be willing to ask a different question. And the answers to those questions are always inside the mind. Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside the Mind. I am Allie May and this is my beautiful friend, podcast bestie, you name it, Jennifer Forster.
Hello, everybody. Good to be back with another episode. Ooh, we've shifted gears, haven't we? We really have shifted gears on the podcast. The next few episodes, we're going to cover some big topics, some topics that, if you're on social media all the time, you will see them spoken about a lot. Allie and I, we want to, the whole point of Inside the Mind is to offer just a different perspective. So what are we going to lead off with today, Miss Allie May?
We're going to dive into boundaries.
Boundaries. I love it. I love it. All right.
Yes. So sometimes I feel like there's a misconception around boundaries. So we're going to dive into that a little bit. Also, what even is a boundary? I remember I was working in corporate. Oh gosh, I shudder. And I was working in corporate maybe 7 years ago. And my boss at the time said to me, Allie, you haven't got any boundaries. You need to put some boundaries in place. And you know how in life, our beautiful mind, it will look for something. Whenever somebody shares something with us, our mind will go in to look for something similar to go, oh yeah, I get that. I understand that. Well, I had nothing when it came to boundaries. I had nothing to compare it to. We're always comparing in our minds. And for me, there was just nothing. So I was sitting there going, what even is a boundary? I was the kind of person that it was like, I'll do whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want, and you can walk all over me. That's fine. And so 2 books he recommended that I have a read of, which I did. One was at the time, it was the 4 Agreements. There's now the 5 Agreements. One of the greatest books, I think.
I 100% concur. If you haven't read, I've not read the 5 Agreements. To me, foundational self-development book is absolutely the 4 Agreements. That and one we always will mention, The Untethered Soul.
Yes.
If they're the only 2 self-development books you ever read, they would be such a solid grounding.
They're both amazing. And the 5th Agreement, I read it. They just added another agreement in, and I preferred the first book, the 4 Agreements, maybe because of the impact it had in my life. So I read that, and he also recommended by the same author, something love. It's on my bookshelf. Oh my gosh, The Art of Love or the Language of Love. Nope. Don Miguel Ruiz is the
author of that one too.
Author as well. Oh, yeah. What is self-mastery? Self-mastery of love. Can't remember. Anyway, those 2 books. And both those books were really mind-blowing for me to begin to learn to set boundaries. And for me, boundaries are about this is what feels good for me and this is what doesn't feel good for me. And it took me a lot of years to be able to have firm boundaries in place. I'm known as the boundary queen because my boundaries are so strong. And it never used to be like that.
Yeah, I love that. I'd like to begin
Sorry, Jen, I've got the book name. It's The Mastery of Love.
There we go.
Thank you, Unconscious Mind.
Amazing. The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel.
Yeah.
Don Miguel. So I would like to begin by getting some definition, or at least some structure, a base point around boundaries. What are boundaries? So let's start there. To you, what is a boundary?
The best way for me to describe it is what I just shared a moment ago. It's what feels good for me and what doesn't. Yeah. And then I get to choose in that moment. So this is interesting because what is the definition? I mean, we can get that from a dictionary. Yeah. And how do we perceive this? Yeah. So For me, a boundary is I come first in every moment. And if somebody asks me to do something and it doesn't feel good for me, then it's a no. And I'm okay to say no. I'm really good at saying no. If I desire something to be different in my life, in my relationships, then I ask for that. These are my boundaries. These are my requirements per se. So another word for me would be requirements. These are my agreements that I'd like to have in place. So boundaries for me are around requirements and agreements. I don't have a technical definition for you on a boundary.
I didn't really want your technical definition.
I'm like, shit, Jen, I'm looking at Jen going,
that's what I wanted, Allie, because, and the reason for that is because I have a definition of boundaries for myself as well, that if you look in a dictionary, I don't have a dictionary in front of me. However, I would think it would be something like something solid and structural and, something that contains. For me, that kind of boundary feels restrictive. It feels, there's no room. There's no room for growth. There's no room for shifting that. So, requirements and agreements. I love that. For me, boundaries are about creating new patterns. That's how I look at a boundary. So if something isn't working for me in my life with someone or something or a particular situation, what I will always do, and I do say always, is I'll always look inside myself and look at, well, how is this playing out, this current scenario, this backwards and forwards, this exchange, this whatever's going on. How's that playing out? And what role am I playing in how that's playing out? And so for me, putting a boundary in place is in and around, I love where you went with that, the agreement and the requirements. It's, for me, how do I want this to be from a new pattern perspective? What is a new pattern I can create in myself that is going to create a different scenario or outcome in this particular situation? And for me, the second piece on that also is what I notice, this is just through my model of the world, I notice, especially on social media, a lot of talk around boundaries that come from what I call fuck you or fuck off energy. Now, if we are creating a boundary, and I'm air quoting that, if we're attempting to create a boundary, air quoted, from fuck you or fuck off energy, that is, to me, going to impact you, the person putting the boundary in place, not the personal situation that the boundary is there for. And it's also slamming a door shut on your heart space as well. For me, that's what happens when we put a boundary in from a fuck you or a fuck off, then I'm somehow shutting off the flow or the opportunity to have love flow in and out of my being. So that's why I tend to not want to, I won't create a boundary from a fuck you or a fuck off energy space. It'll come from what is the highest good, what is the best thing for me here? That's what you said, Allie. I love that, first and foremost. And then what would that look like if I played that out?
Yeah, and I feel like there's a reason why people do the fuck you, fuck off energy side of things with boundaries, because most people aren't used to putting their own needs first or asking for what they want. So when we're putting boundaries in place, and now that we're talking about, like, I've never looked at this before, Jen, thanks for your perspective on this. I'd never looked at a boundary as so restrictive. Like, my body's contracted, my chest feels tight, and talking about the word boundary, like, I'm all about language, both of us are, and boundary now doesn't feel good. Agreement really feels great. And I feel like it's because when people aren't used to, or like, why do people get that energy? Because they're not used to asking for what they want. And sometimes when we're so used to being a doormat, we're so used to being the martyr and not wanting to disrupt anybody's energy or have people dislike us, we're not wanting to speak our truth, then we could go into the space of fuck you energy easily, from the switch of being the nice girl or the nice guy to then going, fuck, I've had enough of this. And it could come out that way. So I feel like boundaries, if we're setting a boundary, we're setting an agreement, with somebody, it gets to come from that place of, what do I desire? What do I truly desire in this moment? And how do we know when we desire something or we do not desire something? If we do not desire it, we're going to get that feeling in our gut. Our intuition, our unconscious mind is going to tell us, this does not feel good for me. If we go against that, I know if I go against mine, anytime I go against my own intuition, my own, I do not want to do this, it's disastrous for me.
It generally does come back and bite me very hard on the butt.
And you know it. There's this feeling in the body. It's like, I don't want to do this. Yeah, sure, I'll do that. The people pleaser in me will do that. I'm so good at not doing that anymore. And in the moments where I catch myself, which was a few weeks back, I caught myself being a people pleaser. And it was like, no, that doesn't feel good. So there was the opportunity then for a new agreement.
Yeah. So I think, if we were to think about boundaries going forward, if we were to do a flip on setting a boundary, you could reframe that. You could, if you wanted to, reframe it into what do I want here? How do I want this to be instead? How would I envisage this playing out? Now, in our experience, my experience, when we ask that question, what can often happen next is the bubbling up of all the reasons why we can't ask for what we want. The person won't agree. There's no point me asking because they won't listen to me anyway. All of those kinds of things then have an opportunity to bubble up. And then that is our opportunity to recognize that, maybe have a look at it and speak, even though our knees might shake a little or our voice might shake a little. We get to still then move forward and ask for what we want, which is essentially all setting a boundary is. And if you were to take something away from this, my invitation would be to look at a boundary from the perspective of, it's not about shutting the other person or the other situation out. It's actually about inviting more spaciousness for you. So if we were to look at you can't see me right now, but if you think of a boundary of like a 1 meter fence around you or a moat, right? Around you, creating healthy boundaries to me is like creating more space between you and the fence or the moat, not about having the boundary come in closer to you and kind of suffocate you.
I can feel it.
Yeah. And if anyone's getting that sense, when you hear the word boundary, if you feel a sense of contraction in your body, then there might be an invitation to explore and play here, and have a look at what is a situation where you've got a boundary. Often boundaries, can be with family and friends and work situations. Either we have them or we don't. And have a look at perhaps where you can give yourself more spaciousness in your agreements and requirements. Oh, that feels good.
Yeah, that does feel good.
Feel really good.
And just to go a little deeper, boundaries, they can go two ways. So if we have staff, if we have people working for us, we may have specific boundaries around that as the person who is employing staff or team members, tribe, however you want to coin that. We also may have a requirement for boundaries or agreements. Boundaries like going out of my vocab. I really, agreements for me is something I set in my life. It's something I ask people for. That feels really light for me. So as I'm sitting here, I'm processing going, boundaries is out the door now.
Yeah, it's very jarring language, isn't it?
It does not feel good in my body. So, we may desire agreements with our children if we have children. We may desire new agreements in our friendships. And, one thing for me that just keeps coming up is that question of, does this feel good for me? In every moment, does this feel good for me? So if you're somebody that's listening to this that isn't so great with setting a boundary or asking for an agreement, then simply you can just ask yourself, does this feel good for me? And when you get that answer of no, when it doesn't feel good, then the conversation gets to be had. The conversation of this does not feel good for me. I'm a no to this. Or no, I don't want to come to the dinner party tonight. Or sorry, child. No, this is not how this is going to go. Like whatever it is for you in whatever situation, does this feel good? And if you ask yourself that question in every single moment when there's a little bit of contraction in your body, when you're making a decision on something, then I feel like you're going to get, I feel like it may be a little easier for you to make the choice, or for us as human beings to make the choice.
I just love that so much. So a question to take away into your week would be, how do you want this to be instead? I feel like that's a question that we ask a lot on this podcast. And there's a reason that we ask that question a lot, because it invites us to come into self-responsibility. It invites us to turn the spotlight in and have a look at what's in the way of us choosing it. You've got something.
I do. I just had a great drop in.
Great. Let's have it.
What happens when we haven't got a boundary? Then we go, you're shit.
Yeah.
You're this. It's your fault. My children are pains in the ass. My partner doesn't listen to me. 99.9% of the time, it will be the fact that we have not got a boundary or an agreement in place, and we will project our shit out onto the other person in front of us. So why would we want to have a boundary? Why would we want to have an agreement? So we stop that behavior. Why do we want to stop that behavior? Because everything that we think, everything that we speak, one finger out, three come back. And whatever's going on in our body, whatever feelings are going on in our body, the contraction of not listening to ourselves and then putting blame outside of ourselves will have us feel like shit every single time. And I'm just not up for that feeling of shit in my body.
Something that I love this, Allie, it's so good. So something you may notice yourself saying sometimes or often is, this person keeps doing this to me.
Yes. To me.
Yeah. This person is making me feel this way. This person is doing this to me. If you can recognize that that's language that you are experiencing in your life, what Allie and I are suggesting is there's a beautiful opportunity there for you to have a look and see, is there an agreement that you have not yet put in place? Go.
I got one other thing to share. I was just sitting here then, Jen, as you were sharing that part after I just shared the previous part, and I was thinking, fuck, no wonder people get triggered by me. And, also known as trigger queen, boundary queen, you name it. It's activating people. And I've got someone in my life at the moment whose boundaries are so strong. And man, every time she says her boundary, she sets her boundary and her requirements, I'm like, fuck, that's jarring. And it's only me that can feel that, right? So I'm like, I have this insight into how people could feel sometimes when I've been like that in the past. So I think that this is where the gentle energy can come in with a boundary. So for me, why did I share that? The learning here for me in this moment is that I can be one of two ways. I can be jarring with my delivery, and I'm very direct, as we know, and I can have a softness to that as well. And what do I choose instead? Well, what do I choose from that? From those two? Well, I would prefer to have my boundaries very strong, my agreements very strong, and also have a lot of love behind that as well. So those two parts, it's not, there's the piece around it's not fuck you energy. It's like, this is how it is for me. I'm not going to back down on that or sugarcoat that. And also I feel like, for me, I desire a softness in my approach to things.
So for me, I love that, Allie, because yes, when I'm looking at setting agreements for myself or what feels good, it's really not a boundary. All I'm looking for is what feels good for me in this moment. Is this a yes or a no? And which of those feels the best for me right now? And the question that I ask inside my mind is this. I look to the part of me that deserves more love, and not deserves, that's not the right word, who gets to be more loved and more honored and more valued. And I look to her and I say something like, this is how I desire this to be because of how much I love myself, because of how much I value myself, because of how much I mean to me. This is how I want the next thing to go. This is how I want this to be. And so that's the flip on the fuck you boundary, and flipping it into what is going to be the greatest and most in service thing for me right now? I've got a really great little example. Some of the messages we get back is that you all love our stories. You all love our personal examples that we give. So I'll just give this little one. It just happened on the weekend. I was away with a beautiful group of people that I love. We spent 4 days away. And on the final day, there was an opportunity on our drive home. We went down in 2 cars, 2 in one, 2 in the other. And there was an opportunity on the drive home to go see a particular show on the way back at the Star Casino on the Gold Coast. And when I felt into that, for me, it was just a no. It didn't call to me to go to this show. Now, I could have very easily just said to myself, oh, well, you know, everyone there's 3 of them saying yes, they want to go. And I'm kind of like, well, I guess I have to go, don't I? Because they're all saying they want to go. And I want to offer that that in that moment I didn't go. I chose not to go because I knew it wasn't going to be the best thing for me. I would have been compromising myself, compromising my value, compromising my needs, compromising my desires in order to make it easy for everybody else. And if we're doing that, then that's a very leaky, bloody boundary that we've got going on. So what happened instead was I said, no, that's not for me, you know, with love, of course, you know, I love that you're all going to go. It's just not for me, not my jam. And I ended up getting to have, synchronistically or not, I believe when we ask for what we want, the universe aligns. I ended up having a 2 p.m. late checkout that day. I got to experience this whole morning of spaciousness to myself at this bougie luxe. Oh, Crystal Brook at Byron, we love you. You're just the most magnificent space. But I got to have I got to have that all to myself. And it was so nourishing and so nurturing. Had I not said yes to myself, that's another way of looking at a boundary. Are you saying yes to yourself? I wouldn't have had that. And inside me would have been this spicy resentment festering away because I was doing something that I knew deep down, I would have been doing something that I knew deep down I didn't want to do. You know, this isn't about, you know, what's good for everybody else. This is always about what is best for me in this moment. Because when we're full, that is what overflows out to the world, of the fullness of us.
Yeah, and just to close out on that, I feel like that's the whole point of a boundary, is because when we are feeling great within ourselves, then we sprinkle that magic everywhere. And the words that are dropping in for me now on this are you honoring yourself? What is your self-love like, and what is your self-worth like? And there are other topics we can dive into down the track.
Let's do that, Allie. So let's close out on that. You feel complete?
I feel complete.
We will see you on the next episode. See you soon.
Mwah. Lots of love.